Decay, the RMS Titanic, was more than steel and steam. It was an idea made manifest, a floating city in miniature, an answer to human audacity and the age's confidence in technology. Launched from Belfast's harbours with champagne and brass bands, she carried the promise of transatlantic modernity. Grand public rooms lit by electric light, staircases carved like trophies, and cabins that blurred the boundary between travel and residence. Her boilers beat like the heart of an enormous beast. Her funnels rose as monumental punctuation against the sky, and her prow cleaved expectations as neatly as she cleaved the water. In those months before the crossing, the ship was a locus of optimism, a place where invention and social ritual interlaced. The voyage began as theatre. Families dressed for dinner, emigrants clutched letters and savings, and officers polished protocols into routines. Beneath the surface, crew and engineers negotiated systems of coal and water, pressure and fatigue, the thin human seals that kept colossal machines breathing. Radio operators tapped a web of Morse code that linked ship to shore in an early digital agora. The ship's log read like a ledger of hope, names, consignments, destinations. In the public rooms there was conversation and music. On the third-class decks, plans for new lives were exchanged in whispers and languages, mapped onto a common problem of hope. Yet the North Atlantic folded itself differently that April night. Ice, the old antagonist of seafarers, moved like slow intention across the sea. Warnings filtered through telegraphy and handwritten notes, whispered in the night to the officers on duty. Bergs sighted, fields reported. In an era when speed and schedules were prized, the imperative to keep time weighed heavy against the ancient demand for caution. Titanic maintained velocity in a cold, bright ocean, her way steady and proud, her lookout scanning a horizon that could alter all accounts. The collision was brief in physical terms, but prolonged in consequence. Metal designed and riveted to hold, yielded in seams and plates. Compartmentalization, the architectural doctrine meant to ensure buoyancy, was outpaced by the geometry of flooding. The bow, encountering a massive and unyielding mass of ice, began to take water that could not be contained. Watertight doors closed on paper plans. The sea, indifferent to design, found its entrances in small failures, multiplied by scale. Water moved as calculation and as narrative, turning machinery into a stage for human improvisation. Witness accounts from that night present a collage of human textures. Courage braided with denial, kindness marred by panic, quiet resignation in corners where strangers clasped hands. Children slept in cabin berths, unaware of the physics playing out beyond their curtains. Sailors hustled and shouted, an organized fear moving down corridors. On deck, lifeboats became the immediate focus of enactment and omission. Some lowered, with care, some filled hesitantly, others launched with an emptiness that later haunted inquiry. The sea, reflecting stars and shipboard lamps, turned into a paradoxical mirror, a surface that received the unraveling above and magnified the smallness of many plans against a vast, dark horizon. When Titanic went down, she did not vanish in silence. Her bow descended into the deep first, a wedge that cut the sky's reflection. The stern rose and buckled, an almost theatrical counterweight to the bow's disappearance. The vessel fractured under its own scale in a sequence that would be analyzed for generations. Debris, chairs, plates, pocket watches, and personal tokens became a strewn mosaic across an indifferent ocean. Survivors in lifeboats watched the ship's last convulsions and carried the images back into the world. A tower of steam, a great light swallowed, a chorus of cries, and finally, a long, cold silence, punctuated only by the small noises of people in cold boats. For decades, memory held the Titanic like a story passed between generations, magnified, mythologized, and moralized. It became a mirror for social critique, a way of reading class and privilege, technological hubris and regulatory failure. The narrative was stark. A vessel advertised as unsinkable had failed, and those most vulnerable paid the highest price. Inquiries ensued, tables and testimonies unfolded, and maritime law shifted. Lifeboat regulations were changed, ice patrols were instituted, wireless operators' duties were clarified. The tragedy demanded reform as recompense for loss, and rules, were adjusted to prevent a repetition of such concentrated grief. The ocean kept the rest. For 74 years, the ship existed as absence, a puncture in popular imagination and a mystery to underwater science. The late 20th century witnessed a new push to extend human senses into zones of pressure and darkness once reserved for myth. The discovery of Titanic's resting place in 1985 by a Franco-American expedition fused curiosity and technology. Side-scan sonar painted a ghostly silhouette, and cameras revealed a ruinous cathedral of rust and collapsing form. The revelation altered collective understanding. The ship was no longer only a story on paper or celluloid, but a complex material ruin, subject to physical processes beyond simple recovery. The wreck introduced a new kind of archaeology, one conducted in silence and under crushing pressure. Deep water is active. It orchestrates slow chemical and biological processes that rearrange meaning. Bacterial communities consume metal and generate rusticles, delicate icicle-like formations that cascade from plates and beams. Salinity, temperature, and deep-sea fauna conspire in a corrosive choreography that slowly transforms human construction back into elemental components. In this slow disassembly, artifacts become both testimony and sacrament. Each object recovered carries with it a context that begins at the moment of loss and extends into the practice of recovery. The scientific gaze on Titanic has never been neutral. Expeditions have balanced curiosity, commerce, and cultural responsibility. Videos and salvaged items entered museum galleries and private collections, prompting debate. Should the wreck be left to the sea's reclamation, or should items be retrieved to serve as tangible anchors for memory? Conservationists developed methods to stabilize waterlogged wood, desalinate metal artifacts, and arrest the slow erosion of organic materials. Those techniques created new disciplines of preservation, where the goal was less to possess than to honor by careful stewardship. Yet the wreck's resonance is less about objects than about lives. Photographs printed from pocket cameras record faces and fashions, but they also portray the late Victorian and Edwardian yearnings for movement of people, goods, identities across the Atlantic. Stories emerged of musicians who played as their ship sank, of strangers who substituted their places for others, of messages and letters never delivered. These human fragments refract the tragedy into innumerable personal narratives, each a small lamp in a larger darkness. Titanic also became a stage for broader social currents, migration and belonging, wealth and invisibility, the private consumption of luxury against public vulnerability. The ship's geography, separate promenades, staircases and decks, embodied social orders that, in crisis, sometimes held and sometimes collapsed. Among the fragments and survivors, those boundaries occasionally bent. Acts of compassion crossed class lines, and the starkness of survival statistics was complicated by individual stories of rescue and sacrifice. In the modern era, Titanic's cultural afterlife is vast. Films, books, exhibitions, and scholarship perpetuate and reframe the tragedy, each retelling tuned by contemporary concerns. Some treatments sentimentalize, some warn about technology, some situate the disaster within debates about regulation and reform. Yet across varied interpretations, one persistent current runs. Titanic endures because it condenses contradictions, aspiration and error, private grief and public spectacle, the fragile human body in a world of indifferent forces. Today, as technology and ethics advance, questions persist. Is it right to film the wreck for entertainment? How should we weigh scientific knowledge against the sanctity of a site where many died? Are there moral limits to the commercialization of grief? Advances in sonar, remotely operated vehicles, and digital reconstruction offer less invasive ways.